the previous videos, we looked at various deployment techniques, right? So now that our code is deployed, we have to ensure and monitor that the performance of the application is as per the acceptable standards, right? So now in this video, we are going to look at ways in which we can improve the performance of our web applications. So what are some ways in which we can improve the performance of our software? So one way is to do caching, right? So what is caching? So caching stores results of common operations in memory, right? And this helps to reduce the load on servers, right? So for example, when the client requests some data, right? So instead of fetching that data from the database, right, it can retrieve it from the memory, right? And retrieving from memory is faster, right? So if there are common queries which are executed, and if there hasn't been any changes in the database, right, these queries can be stored in memory and it can be fetched from the memory, right? And there are different tools which help us in caching. Memcached is one, Redis is another, right? And there are also different levels of caching, right? So the first level is at the web browser itself, right? So the web browser itself has a cache, right? And the previously visited pages can be reused, right? And it contains a copy of previously visited pages, right? And after verifying from the server that the page hasn't been changed, the web browser can load the page from the cache, right? Otherwise, even at the web server, there are page caches. So instead of maybe accessing the database, the web server can send the web page which is stored in its cache to the client. And caches can happen in the database also, right? So the database can have a query cache which consists of results of recent queries which haven't changed, right? And instead of querying the database again, the database can return the results from the query cache, right, to the web server and then to the client. So caching is an important way in which we can improve the performance of our system. Now, another way is to use task queues, right? So let's say as our application or our website grows, right, there are a lot of resource and time consuming tasks which happen, right? For example, you want to send an email or a notification to thousands of users, right? Or you want to create or update database records, right? For example, if you want to delete a user, then you have to delete all data associated with that user, right? And these tasks need not be executed immediately, right? You can notify the user that these tasks will be executed and maybe send a notification later to them once it has been completed, right? And this can be done using what is known as an asynchronous work queue, right? And it is asynchronous because it is executed outside the normal HTTP request or response cycle, right? So let's say we want to send an email to a user, right? That's a functionality, right? So usually in the normal request response cycle, what happens? So you send a request to the server saying, send an email to my friend. The server processes that request, actually sends an email and sends a response saying that, okay, the email has been sent. However, this is not scalable for, let's say, if you want to send an email to thousands of users, right? you cannot expect the user to wait for the response after processing or sending email to thousands of users, right? So what we do is we send this task to a asynchronous work queue. So what does this work queue consist of? Firstly, it consists of a queue of jobs which need to be performed and associated parameters, right? And not only that, it contains a pool of workers, right, that can take multiple jobs from the queue and perform them, right? So, and notice that it's not just one worker which is performing or processing the request, right? There are many workers which can divide the work, and this results in much lesser time, right? And another advantage is that, let's say if you are anticipating high traffic or higher traffic than normal, you can dynamically increase the pool of workers so that the jobs can be completed in lesser time. Now, another way to improve the performance of your application is to make sure that your web pages load and render quickly, right? And web applications contain a lot of static content like HTML, CSS, JavaScript, images, right? And it's very important that these elements are loaded quickly. So you might be thinking, why is it so important, right? And maybe all of this is just text, and what difference can a few seconds make, right? Well, there is a lot of evidence which shows that loading is an important factor for performance, right? So here in this image, you can see that the level of stress which is caused by mobile delays, right? It's as comparable as watching a horror movie, right? And even we as users, when a particular page takes a little more than expected time to load, maybe just even a few seconds more, right? We feel uncomfortable and agitated. And not only that, loading and rendering pages quickly is important from a business standpoint as well, right? It affects the sales and business of your product, right? So there are several examples. So in 2016, the site called AliExpress, it increased the speed of their site by 30%, and customer orders jumped by almost 10.5%, right? And back in the time in 2006, right, Google just slowed down their search results by just half a second, right? But the noticeable effect was user requests dropped by 25%. So these, and there are many other examples which show that loading and rendering pages, it affects the sales and business aspects of your product as well. So now, what are ways in which we can improve the loading and rendering times? So one way is to minify your code, right? So what does minify mean? Minify means to strip your code away from all spaces, tabs, extra white spaces, etc. Right? So the code here on the left is a simple JavaScript function, right, which takes Fahrenheit as a parameter and returns the temperature in Celsius. And there are various tools which help you minify the code, right? And passing this to a minifier, right, strips all the spaces away, spaces, tabs, etc. And even it changes the parameter, right? And you can see that there's a saving of almost 41%, right? And this is just for a simple small code, small function, right? And all of this can add up and result in a significant saving in space, and hence your pages can load faster. Another method is to compress static pages, right? So there are tools like Brotil and gzip which will help you compress your web pages. So now that we have seen some ways in which we can improve the performance of our applications, now once our application has been deployed, it is very important to constantly monitor it. So why? The reason being that even after sufficient testing, right, in the testing or the staging environment, issues can still arise in the live environment, right? So for example, during peak times, right, the CPU utilization, the memory utilization, like how is it getting affected, right? And even storage, right? How much is consumed versus how much is free. So if there are a lot of database intensive activities and your disk gets filled up, right, and there's no more space available, then you cannot add new things to the database, and this can result in errors for the user, right? And you also need to check for network bandwidth, latency, right? For example, how much time does it take for a user to get a response? So that is known as latency. Is that getting affected? That also has to be checked periodically. So based on this, the development and the operations teams, they can respond and fix problems. So how can we monitor our applications, right? So there are various monitoring tools, right? One simple type of tool are reporting tools, right? So what do reporting tools do? They generate reports, right? So there are tools which, if you provide a URL to them, they analyze the page resources and they provide suggestions, right? And they check different metrics like your SEO and accessibility metrics, and they calculate your performance score, the performance score of your website, right? And for example, Lighthouse is a service provided by Google, right? You can install, it's a Google Chrome extension, and you can try it out and check the performance or the scores for performance score for various websites, right? So this is an example of the Lighthouse monitoring tool. So I asked Lighthouse to give me the reports for this verisim.tech website, and it gives, you know, several metrics, like, you know, how much time does it take, what is the speed index, right? So all this you can look up when you check Lighthouse, right? Now another important reason why we should monitor our app is to understand how customers behave, right? So for example, you can analyze click streams, right? So which sequence of pages do your users visit the most, right? So your website might have several paths which the user can take, right? Which of these paths are users taking the most, right? Or, you know, how much time do they spend on a given page, right? What that is known as the think time or the dwell time on a particular web page, right? That is also an important metric which you can monitor. Now another metric is known as abandonment, right? So what is this? So as we saw that there are various flows in our application, right? There are various paths which the user can take, right? So for example, you have a product page, right? Then you click on buy now, then you add your address, then you add your payment details, and then you finally pay and buy the product, right? So if this is a flow, we can check what percentage of users abandon the flow, right, rather than complete the flow. So completing the flow is a desirable path, right, for a business or for the product. Whereas if the user abandons this flow in between, right, that results in loss of business for that particular customer, right? So what percentage of users abandon this flow is an important metric which we can monitor. And there are several analytics tools as well which help you do this, right? So what they do is you can embed a small piece of JavaScript in every page in your website, right? And this contains what is known as a tracking code, and this tracking code sends the information to the analytics tool each time the page is loaded, right? So for example, this is an example of Google Analytics, right? And this tells you, right, it gives you several metrics of what is happening after each interaction, right? Where is the drop off happening and so on. So you can use Google Analytics services in your websites as well, right? You have to just you have to just sign up for the account and put a proper tracking code in your website. So monitoring is useful for A and B testing also, right? So what is this A/B testing? So let's say you have version A of your app, of your website, which has some issues, right? Maybe users are abandoned, so maybe the abandonment is high, right? Now to resolve this, right, you create another version, right? That's a new workflow, or maybe you might create a better UI, right? Or you might do some changes so that these issues can be mitigated, right? And now what you can do is you can do a canary deployment, right? Which is an incremental rollout where some users, they get version A and other users get version B, right? And now you can monitor, right, both versions and check which version is better. And what do I mean by better? Better might mean more traffic, right? Or maybe more dwell time on a particular page, maybe more sales, maybe lesser abandonment, etc., right? So there are various metrics which you can monitor, right? So monitoring is useful for A/B testing also, to check whether the new version of your software or your application is better than the previous one. So to summarize, in this video, we looked at different ways in which we can improve performance of our application through caching, through using task queues and rendering pages faster. And we also looked at monitoring and why it is important, right? We looked at report generating tools and analytics tools. And we also saw that monitoring is important to understand customer behavior as well as for A/B testing.